Judge Margaret Chen's alarm clock buzzed at 5:47 a.m., just as it had every Tuesday for the past 23 years. She silenced it with the practiced precision of someone whose life ran on routine and discipline. By 6:15, she was nursing her first cup of black coffee, reviewing case files at her kitchen table while her husband, David, still slept upstairs. The Monroe County Courthouse docket for October 17th lay spread before her: 3 custody disputes, 2 sentencing hearings, 1 probation violation, and finally, the Daniels adoption finalization. Margaret circled the adoption case with her red pen. These were supposed to be the easy ones, the happy endings that made the difficult work worthwhile. But after presiding over 10,247 cases, yes, she kept count, Margaret had learned that easy was a dangerous assumption. She'd seen adoptions fall apart at the last moment. She'd watched foster parents change their minds in her courtroom. She'd witnessed children refuse to be adopted, too traumatized to accept love. Still, something about this case felt different. She pulled the thick file folder toward her and began reading through Emma Grace's history for the 3rd time that week. The details made her stomach turn, even after decades of reading such reports. Neglect, suspected abuse, a biological mother with severe addiction issues, a father who disappeared before Emma's first birthday. The little girl had been found by neighbors at 19 months old, alone in an apartment for what authorities estimated was 3 days, sitting in her own filth, severely dehydrated. Margaret removed her reading glasses and rubbed her eyes. Some images never left you. She'd seen the photographs from that day, photographs she wished she could unsee. But Emma had gotten lucky, if you could call any of it luck. Sarah and Michael Daniels, a couple who'd been trying to conceive for 7 years, had been Emma's 3rd foster placement. The first 2 families couldn't handle her night terrors and aggressive behaviors, but the Daniels had stuck it out. 18 months of appointments, therapy sessions, and sleepless nights. By 7:45 a.m., Margaret was in her Volvo, driving the familiar route to the courthouse through downtown Rochester. Morning light filtered through the autumn leaves, painting the streets in amber and gold. She loved this city, had served it her entire adult life, but lately she'd been feeling the weight of it all. David kept suggesting retirement. "You've given enough, Maggie," he'd said just last week. "Let someone else carry the burden." But could she walk away? Every case mattered. Every child deserved someone who actually cared, not just another burned-out judge counting days until retirement. She pulled into her reserved parking spot at 8:03 a.m., right on schedule. The Monroe County Courthouse was an imposing limestone structure built in 1896, with high ceilings, marble floors, and the kind of architectural grandeur meant to remind people that justice was serious business. Margaret had walked these halls for so long that she knew every creak in the floorboards, every echo pattern, every musty corner. Her bailiff, Tom Patterson, was already waiting outside her chambers with a fresh pot of coffee and a worried expression. Tom had worked with Margaret for 12 years, and she'd learned to read his moods like a barometer. "What's wrong?" she asked, unlocking her office door. "Nothing's wrong exactly," Tom said, following her inside. Did you see the security schedule for today?" Margaret hung her coat on the antique brass rack and settled behind her mahogany desk. "Can't say that I did. Why?" "K-9 unit is doing a sweep during morning hearings. Some threat was called in yesterday afternoon, probably nothing, but protocol says they check the building." So, Margaret pulled up her computer, scanning emails. "So Officer Morrison and Rex will be here, during the Daniels adoption." Margaret looked up. "Tom, you're not making sense. Why do I care if a police dog is in the building during an adoption hearing?" Tom shrugged, but his frown deepened. "I don't know, Judge, I've got this weird feeling. You know how sometimes you just know a day is going to be different?" Margaret did know. After more than 2 decades on the bench, she developed her own sixth sense about cases. Some days you could feel something in the air, a charge, a tension, an inevitability. but she dismissed it with a wave of her hand. "Tom, I've presided over adoption hearings with fire drills, power outages, and once during a bomb scare that turned out to be someone's forgotten lunch bag. A police dog in the building is the least dramatic thing that could happen." "If you say so, Judge." Tom didn't sound convinced. By 9:30 a.m., Margaret was in her courtroom, black robe flowing as she took her seat behind the bench. She'd worked through the custody disputes, both settled after she'd given the parents her famous, "Is this really how you want to hurt your children?" speech. The sentencing hearings had been routine. The probation violation had been continued to next month. Now it was 11:17 a.m., and the Daniels family would be here any moment. Margaret straightened her papers and allowed herself a small smile. This would be the good part of her day. This would remind her why she'd become a judge in the first place. A 3-year-old girl who'd survived hell would officially get a real family. Simple, straightforward, beautiful. Tom appeared at her chamber door. "Judge, the Daniels family is in the hallway, but..." "But what?" "You should probably know that Officer Morrison just started the K-9 sweep on this floor. They're right outside." Margaret felt it then, that electric tingle Tom had mentioned. That sense that the universe was arranging pieces on a chessboard she couldn't see. She shook it off. "Tom, bring the family in when they're ready, and stop being superstitious." Tom nodded but lingered in the doorway. "Judge Chen, in all the years I've worked with you, have you ever cried during a hearing?" The question caught Margaret off guard. "No, never. Why would you ask that?" "No reason," Tom said quietly, "just curious." As he left, Margaret looked down at the adoption decree waiting for her signature. Emma Grace, soon to be Emma Grace Daniels. Such a small name for someone who'd survived so much. Outside her courtroom in the marble hallway, footsteps approached. Multiple sets, adults and one very small child. And then, from the opposite direction, the distinct click of canine claws on polished stone. Margaret Chen, who thought she'd seen everything in 23 years, had no idea that in exactly 8 minutes, her entire understanding of justice, healing, and hope was about to be completely transformed by 7 words from a traumatized 3-year-old, and a German shepherd who somehow understood exactly what that little girl needed. The morning she'd thought would be routine was about to become the most unforgettable day of her career. Tom was right, this day was different. Very different. Sarah Daniels gripped the steering wheel so tightly her knuckles had gone white. In the rearview mirror, she could see Emma Grace strapped into her car seat, staring blankly out the window at the passing Rochester streets. The 3-year-old hadn't said a word during the entire 30-minute drive from their suburban home to downtown. Not one word. "She's just nervous," Michael said from the passenger seat, but his voice lacked conviction. He'd been saying the same thing for 18 months, and they both knew it was more than nerves. Sarah's eyes burned with tears she refused to let fall. Today was supposed to be the happiest day of their lives. After 7 years of failed fertility treatments, 3 miscarriages, and $80,000 in medical bills, they were finally becoming parents. Legal parents. Forever parents. So why did she feel like she was driving toward a disaster instead of a dream? "Maybe we should have prepared her more," Sarah whispered, careful not to let Emma hear the doubt in her voice. "We've been preparing her for months, honey. Dr. Rivera said she understands what's happening today." Michael reached over and squeezed Sarah's hand. "She's just processing in her own way." Processing, that's what everyone said about Emma. The therapists, the social workers, the foster care coordinators. She's processing her trauma. Give her time to process. Don't rush the processing. But how much time did processing take? How many months of silence? How many nights of blood-curdling screams at 3 a.m.? How many times would Emma flinch when Sarah tried to hug her before she'd finally accept that she was safe now? Sarah pulled into the courthouse parking garage at 10:47 a.m. They were 13 minutes early for their 11:00 a.m. hearing, perfectly on time just as they'd planned. Everything about their approach to Emma had been carefully planned, meticulously researched, executed with precision. And yet, the little girl remained an island unto herself, unreachable despite all their love and effort. "Okay, sweetheart," Sarah said, turning around to face Emma's car seat. "We're here. This is the big day we've been talking about. Remember, today you become Emma Grace Daniels officially." Emma's dark eyes, eyes that had seen far too much for a child not yet 4 years old, shifted to meet Sarah's gaze. For a moment, Sarah thought she saw something flicker there. Recognition, fear, hope. But then it was gone, replaced by that familiar blank expression that broke Sarah's heart every single time. Michael unbuckled Emma from her car seat while Sarah gathered their documents, birth certificates, foster care papers, background checks, home study reports, financial statements, and the precious stack of photos showing Emma's 18 months with their family. The social worker had suggested they bring visual evidence of Emma's integration into their home, as if love could be proven with photographs. Emma's feet touched the concrete parking garage floor, and she immediately reached for her stuffed elephant, a threadbare gray creature named Mr. Trunk that went everywhere with her. It was the only possession from her old life that Emma had kept. The social worker said it represented continuity, something familiar in a world that had betrayed her. Sarah hated that elephant. She associated it with everything Emma had suffered. But Emma loved it fiercely, and Sarah had learned to accept that healing didn't follow anyone's preferred timeline. They walked toward the courthouse entrance, Emma between them, each parent holding one of her small hands. Or rather, Emma allowed her hands to rest limply in theirs. She never squeezed back, never initiated contact. Sarah had stopped expecting her to. The Monroe County Courthouse loomed before them, all limestone and authority. Sarah's stomach churned. She'd been in courtrooms before, traffic violations, her father's estate settlement, but never for something this monumental, never for something that would define the rest of their lives. Michael pulled open the heavy brass door and they stepped into the marble hallway. The building was exactly as Sarah had imagined, imposing, cold, echoing with the weight of serious decisions. Emma's tiny footsteps made almost no sound on the polished floor, while Sarah's heels clicked loudly, announcing their presence. "This way," Michael said, consulting the paper with their courtroom assignment. "Courtroom 6, 3rd floor." They rode the elevator in silence. Emma stared at the brass doors, her reflection distorted in the polished metal. Sarah watched her daughter, yes, her daughter, regardless of what any paper said, and wondered what was going through that brilliant, damaged mind. Dr. Rivera, Emma's trauma therapist, had warned them that adoption day might trigger unexpected reactions. She was removed from her biological mother in a government building, Dr. Rivera had explained. Buildings like courthouses might feel dangerous to her on a subconscious level. She might regress. She might act out, or she might shut down completely. So far, it looked like complete shutdown. They exited on the 3rd floor and found a wooden bench outside courtroom 6. Sarah checked her watch. 10:53 a.m. 7 minutes until their hearing. 7 minutes until the judge would ask Emma if she wanted to be adopted, and Emma would have to speak. Would she? Could she? "Look, Emma," Michael said, kneeling down to her eye level. "See that door? Behind there is a very nice judge named Judge Chen. She's going to ask us some questions, and then she's going to sign a paper that says you're our daughter forever. Isn't that exciting?" Emma stared at the courtroom door with an expression that could have been excitement or terror or complete dissociation. Sarah couldn't tell any more. "Do you want some water, sweetie?" Sarah pulled out a small bottle from her bag. Emma shook her head, the first communication she'd offered all morning. Sarah and Michael exchanged glances. They were both thinking the same thing. What if Emma says no? What if, when the judge asks her if she wants to be adopted, Emma refuses? It was rare, but it happened. Children who'd been through severe trauma sometimes rejected safety because it was unfamiliar. What if Emma couldn't accept love because love had only ever hurt her before? Mr. and Mrs. Daniels. A woman's voice interrupted Sarah's spiraling thoughts. Their social worker, Patricia Gomez, was walking toward them with a warm smile. "How's everyone feeling?" "Nervous," Michael admitted. "Terrified," Sarah added. Patricia looked down at Emma. "And how about you, sweet girl? Are you ready for your big day?" Emma said nothing. She pressed Mr. Trunk against her chest and stared at the floor. Patricia's smile faltered just slightly, a tiny crack in her professional optimism. "Judge Chen is wonderful with children," she said, directing her words to Sarah and Michael now. "If Emma gets overwhelmed, the judge will take a break. There's no pressure. We all just want what's best for Emma." But what if what's best for Emma isn't us? The thought crashed through Sarah's mind like a wrecking ball. What if we've been deluding ourselves? What if 18 months of therapy and love and patience haven't been enough? Down the hallway, a door opened and closed. Footsteps approached, confident, measured, accompanied by a sound Sarah couldn't quite identify. A jingling. No, more like tags clicking together. Emma's head snapped up. For the first time that morning, her expression changed. Her eyes widened. Her grip on Mr. Trunk loosened. She stood up from the bench without being prompted, which she never did. "Emma," Sarah reached for her, but Emma took a step forward away from them. That's when Sarah saw what had captured her daughter's attention. Coming around the corner was a police officer in full uniform, and beside him, on a short leash, was the largest German shepherd Sarah had ever seen. The dog's muscles rippled beneath his dark coat. His ears were alert, his posture professional and controlled. He wore a vest that read K9 Unit in bold yellow letters. Sarah's first instinct was panic. Emma didn't do well with animals. She'd screamed hysterically when a neighbor's golden retriever had approached her at the park. She'd refused to go into pet stores. The therapist said it was likely because animals were unpredictable and Emma needed to control her environment to feel safe. But Emma wasn't screaming. She wasn't running away. She was walking directly toward the police dog. "Emma, no." Sarah started to stand, but Michael's hand on her arm stopped her. "Wait," he whispered. "Look at her face." Sarah looked. Emma's expression had transformed into something Sarah had never seen before, focused, intense almost, hopeful. The police officer noticed Emma approaching and stopped. The German shepherd sat immediately, his training evident in every disciplined muscle. And in that marble hallway, outside courtroom 6, with their adoption hearing scheduled to begin in exactly 3 minutes, Sarah and Michael Daniels watched their silent, traumatized, unreachable daughter do something extraordinary. She reached out her hand toward a stranger's dog, dropped her beloved Mr. Trunk on the floor, and took another step forward. For the first time in 18 months, Emma had chosen to trust something. Officer Jake Morrison had been working with police dogs for 11 years, and with Rex specifically for the past 5. In that time, they'd conducted 1,847 security sweeps, found 23 kilograms of narcotics, assisted in 14 arrests, and completed countless public demonstrations at schools and community events. Rex was the most disciplined K9 partner Morrison had ever worked with, a professional in every sense of the word. Which is why what happened on the 3rd floor of the Monroe County Courthouse that Tuesday morning made absolutely no sense. Morrison had received the call at 6:30 a.m. A vague threat had been phoned into the courthouse the previous evening, something about making them pay for taking children away. The caller hadn't been specific, and the threat seemed low-level, but protocol was protocol. Morrison and Rex would sweep the building during morning proceedings, clear each floor and file a report. Standard procedure. He'd done it 100 times before. They'd started on the ground floor at 9:15 a.m. and worked their way up methodically. Rex performed flawlessly as always. His nose investigated corners, doorways, trash receptacles, and ventilation grates with practiced efficiency. Nothing unusual on the 1st floor. Nothing on the second. By 10:55 a.m., they were beginning the third-floor sweep. Morrison loved this part of his job, the quiet competence of working with an animal who understood him better than most humans did. Rex wasn't just a partner, he was family. Morrison's wife, Jennifer, joked that he spent more quality time with the dog than with her. She wasn't entirely wrong. "Okay, buddy," Morrison said as they exited the stairwell onto the third floor. "Last floor, then we're done. You've been perfect today." Rex's tail wagged once, his version of "I know." The third floor was quieter than the others. Most of the morning hearings had concluded or were in session. The marble hallway stretched ahead of them, lined with dark wooden doors leading to various courtrooms. Sunlight streamed through tall windows, casting long rectangles of light across the polished floor. Morrison unclipped Rex's lead slightly, giving him more range to investigate. The German Shepherd moved with purpose, nose working, ears alert. They passed courtroom 4, then courtroom 5. Everything was clear. Then they rounded the corner toward courtroom 6. Rex stopped. Not a gradual stop, not a trained stop. A dead stop mid-stride, one paw still raised off the ground. "Rex," Morrison tugged gently on the leash. "Heel, boy." The dog didn't move. His entire body had gone rigid, every muscle locked in place. His ears shot forward, laser-focused on something ahead. Morrison's heart rate kicked up. In 5 years, Rex had never frozen like this. When Rex detected drugs, he gave his trained alert, sitting and staring at the source. When Rex sensed danger, he'd bark or position himself protectively. But this was something else entirely. Morrison's hand instinctively moved to his service weapon as he scanned the hallway for threats. That's when he saw them, a family sitting on a bench outside courtroom 6. A man and woman in their mid-30s, well-dressed, nervous-looking, and between them, a tiny girl in a pink dress. The little girl was staring directly at Rex. Morrison had seen plenty of children react to Rex. Some squealed with delight and asked to pet him. Some hid behind their parents' legs in fear. Some ignored him completely, too distracted by phones or toys to care about a dog. This child was doing none of those things. She was simply looking, staring with an intensity that made Morrison's skin prickle. Her dark eyes were locked onto Rex with a focus that seemed impossible for someone so young. She wasn't smiling. She wasn't scared. She was studying Rex like he was the answer to a question she'd been asking her entire short life. And Rex, disciplined, professional, unshakable Rex, was staring back with equal intensity. "What the hell?" Morrison muttered under his breath. He'd seen Rex around hundreds of children. The dog was gentle and patient with kids, but he'd never shown particular interest in any specific child. He treated them all the same, friendly but professional, a working dog who understood his role. But right now, Rex looked like he'd forgotten every bit of his training. The dog's brown eyes were fixed on the little girl with something Morrison could only describe as recognition. No, that was crazy. Rex had never seen this child before. "Rex, come," Morrison commanded, using his firm voice. Rex's ears twitched, acknowledging the command, but he didn't move, didn't even shift his weight. Morrison felt a chill run down his spine. This was wrong. This violated everything he understood about his partner's behavior. The woman on the bench, the mother Morrison assumed, was watching the interaction with wide, frightened eyes. She started to stand, clearly about to intervene, to pull her daughter away from the scary police dog. Morrison made a split-second decision. "Ma'am," he called out, his voice gentle. "It's okay, he won't hurt her." The woman hesitated, half standing, caught between protective instinct and politeness. Morrison took 3 slow steps forward. Rex moved with him, completely synchronized, but the dog's eyes never left the little girl. It was like watching 2 magnets drawn together, an invisible force Morrison couldn't see but could definitely feel. "Would she like to meet him?" Morrison heard himself ask. The question surprised him even as he said it. He rarely let people interact with Rex during official duty. It blurred professional boundaries. But something about this moment felt important, necessary even. The mother looked at her husband, panic and confusion warring on her face. I don't know if that's a good idea. Emma doesn't really like. But Emma was already standing. Morrison watched, stunned, as the tiny girl in the pink dress rose to her feet without any prompting from her parents. She moved with slow, deliberate steps, like someone walking toward something sacred. And then she did something that made Morrison's breath catch in his throat. She dropped her stuffed elephant. It fell from her hands and hit the marble floor with a soft thump. The elephant had clearly been clutched tightly. Morrison could see the wrinkles in the fabric where small hands had gripped it. Whatever that toy meant to the child, it was important, but she just let it go without a second glance. Her entire focus was on Rex. Emma, the mother's voice was strained with worry. The little girl, Emma, took another step forward, then another. She was less than 6 feet away now. Morrison knelt down slowly, bringing himself to the child's level. Hey there, sweetheart. This is Rex. He's a very good dog. Would you like to say hello to him? Emma didn't acknowledge Morrison's words. It was like he wasn't even there. Her eyes were locked on Rex, and Rex's eyes were locked on her. Rex, Morrison commanded softly, sit. The dog obeyed instantly, breaking his 5-year record of weird behavior by at least following one command. He sat perfectly still, tail curled around his haunches, ears forward, completely focused on Emma. Emma took 3 more steps. She was close now, close enough that Morrison could see the smattering of freckles across her nose, the slight tremor in her hands, the rapid rise and fall of her small chest. The child was terrified. But she kept coming anyway. Morrison glanced at the parents. The father had stood up now too, and both of them wore expressions of absolute shock. Whatever they'd expected their daughter to do today, approaching a police dog apparently wasn't on the list. A door opened down the hallway, and a bailiff stuck his head out, noticed the scene, and quietly closed the door again. Morrison barely registered it. His entire attention was on the impossible connection unfolding before him. Emma stopped about 12 inches from Rex. She was so small that even with Rex sitting, they were nearly eye-to-eye. The child and the dog regarded each other in absolute silence. The hallway had gone quiet. Morrison realized that other people had gathered, a few lawyers with briefcases, some court staff, a clerk carrying folders. Everyone had stopped to watch this moment that none of them could quite understand. Morrison barely breathed. Rex's tail remained still. Emma's hand trembled. And then, slowly, so slowly it seemed to take forever, Emma reached out one small hand and placed it on top of Rex's head. Rex's tail began to wag. Not the vigorous, happy wag of a pet greeting its owner, not the excited wag of a dog about to play. This was something different, a slow, gentle, deliberate wag, almost respectful. Emma's fingers disappeared into Rex's dark fur. The dog remained perfectly still, allowing the touch, accepting it. Tears were streaming down the mother's face now. The father had his hand over his mouth. Morrison felt his own throat tighten with an emotion he couldn't name. For nearly a full minute they stayed like that, child and dog, hand and fur, silence and understanding. Morrison had conducted hundreds of K9 demonstrations. He'd given countless speeches about the bond between handler and dog, about trust and partnership, but he'd never seen anything like this. This wasn't training. This wasn't conditioning. This was something deeper, something primal and true. This was 2 souls recognizing each other's pain. Because that's what Morrison suddenly understood with perfect clarity. Rex had been a rescue dog. Morrison had gotten him from a shelter 5 years ago, a German Shepherd puppy who'd been abused, starved, left to die in a basement. The vet had said Rex probably wouldn't survive, but he had. He'd survived and thrived and become one of the best K-9 officers in the state. Rex understood trauma. Rex understood survival. And somehow, impossibly, Rex recognized that same survival in this tiny 3-year-old girl. Emma leaned forward, pressing her face close to Rex's ear. She was going to whisper something. Morrison held his breath. Patricia Gomez had been a social worker for the Department of Child Services for 19 years. She'd placed 247 children in foster care, overseen 189 adoptions, and testified in more custody hearings than she could count. She'd seen children recover from unimaginable circumstances, and she'd seen children who never recovered at all. Emma Grace had been one of her most challenging cases. Standing in that courthouse hallway, watching Emma approach the police dog, Patricia felt something she rarely allowed herself to feel in this job: hope. Emma had been nearly catatonic when Patricia first met her 18 months ago. The toddler had been hospitalized for severe dehydration and malnutrition, barely verbal, covered in bruises in various stages of healing. The pediatrician's report had made Patricia cry in her car afterward, something she hadn't done in years. Emma had been failed by every adult who should have protected her. The first 2 foster placements hadn't worked. The Hendersons returned Emma after 3 weeks, saying they weren't equipped for her level of trauma. The Bishops lasted 2 months before requesting her removal, citing Emma's violent nightmares and refusal to bond. Then came Sarah and Michael Daniels. Patricia had been skeptical, a couple with no parenting experience taking on a severely traumatized toddler. It seemed like a disaster waiting to happen, but the Daniels had surprised her. They'd been patient beyond measure, committed beyond reason. They'd attended every therapy session, implemented every strategy, endured every setback. And yet Emma had remained distant, functional but unreachable. She'd learned to follow routines, to tolerate affection, to exist within their family structure. But she'd never truly connected. Not once in 18 months had Patricia witnessed Emma initiate physical contact or express genuine emotion. Until now. Patricia watched Emma's small hand rest on the German Shepherd's head, and she felt tears threatening. After 19 years, after 247 broken children, she still hadn't developed the armor she probably needed. Beside her, Sarah Daniels was openly sobbing. Michael had his arm around his wife's shoulders, his own eyes red and wet. They were watching their daughter touch another living creature voluntarily for the first time since they'd known her. "She dropped Mr. Trunk," Sarah whispered through her tears. "She never drops Mr. Trunk." Patricia looked down. The stuffed elephant lay abandoned on the marble floor, forgotten. That elephant had been Emma's security blanket, her constant companion, the only object that seemed to bring her comfort. And she just let it fall. Because something more important had appeared. Officer Morrison was kneeling beside his dog, his expression a mixture of awe and confusion. Patricia had seen him around the courthouse before, solid, professional, by the book. Right now, he looked completely out of his depth, like a man watching something he couldn't explain and didn't quite believe. Rex, the German Shepherd, remained perfectly still under Emma's touch. Patricia knew dogs. She'd grown up on a farm with working dogs, had raised 3 of her own over the years. This dog's behavior was extraordinary. He wasn't just tolerating a child's attention. He was actively participating in a moment of connection. His brown eyes never left Emma's face. His tail moved in that slow, thoughtful way that dogs do when they're not just happy but emotionally engaged. "How long has it been?" Michael asked quietly. Patricia checked her watch. Almost 2 full minutes. 2 minutes of silence. 2 minutes of a 3-year-old standing perfectly still, touching a police dog, neither of them moving. In a world where toddlers had approximately 15-second attention spans, it felt like an eternity. Down the hallway, more people had gathered. Patricia noticed Tom Patterson, Judge Chen's bailiff, standing in the doorway of courtroom 6. He was supposed to be preparing for the adoption hearing, which should have started 3 minutes ago, but instead he was frozen, watching Emma and Rex. A young lawyer Patricia didn't recognize had stopped mid-stride, briefcase in hand, transfixed by the scene. Two court clerks stood near the elevator, whispering to each other but not moving, not wanting to break whatever spell had been cast. Even the building itself seemed to be holding its breath. The usual sounds of the courthouse, footsteps, conversations, closing doors, had faded to nothing. There was only silence and the soft sound of Emma's breathing. Patricia had studied childhood trauma extensively. She'd taken courses, attended seminars, read everything she could find about attachment disorders and developmental psychology. She knew that traumatized children often struggled with trust, that they built walls to protect themselves from being hurt again, that healing required patience and consistency and time. But she'd also read about moments like this, rare, inexplicable moments when a traumatized child encountered something that bypassed all their defense mechanisms. Animals, especially, could reach parts of a wounded child that no human could access. There was something about the non-judgmental presence of an animal, the simplicity of their affection, the safety of their unconditional acceptance. Rex wasn't asking Emma to talk. He wasn't asking her to smile or perform or prove she was okay. He was just there, present, solid, safe. Emma's breathing had deepened, slowed. Her shoulders, which had been hunched and tense since they'd arrived at the courthouse, had dropped slightly. Her face, usually so blank and carefully neutral, showed the faintest hint of peace. Sarah's sobbing had quieted to silent tears streaming down her cheeks. Michael squeezed his wife's hand so tightly his knuckles had gone white. "Should we do something?" he whispered to Patricia. "No," Patricia said firmly. "Let her have this moment. Whatever this is, she needs it." Officer Morrison seemed to have come to the same conclusion. He remained kneeling, perfectly still, not interfering. Patricia noticed his eyes were suspiciously bright. Even hardened police officers weren't immune to the emotional weight of what they were witnessing. Emma's fingers moved slightly, gently stroking Rex's fur. The dog's eyes closed briefly, then opened again, still fixed on the little girl's face. His tail continued its slow, steady wag. Patricia found herself thinking about Emma's file, about the police report from the day she'd been found. The neighbors had heard crying, hours of crying, before they'd finally called 911. When officers entered the apartment, they'd found Emma sitting in the corner of her crib, surrounded by her own waste, so dehydrated she could barely cry anymore. Her biological mother had been passed out on the couch, having been on a 3-day drug binge. The apartment had been crawling with roaches. There'd been no food, no clean water, no diapers, no indication that anyone had cared for this child in days. The responding officer had wrapped Emma in his jacket and carried her out. Patricia had read his statement. The kid didn't cry, didn't fight, just stared at me with these huge eyes like she was already dead inside. I've been on the force for 20 years and that look haunts me. Emma had learned at barely 19 months old that adults were dangerous. That trust meant pain. That reaching out meant being hurt. She'd spent 18 months with the Daniels learning to survive in a safe environment, but survival wasn't the same as living. Surviving meant going through the motions. Living meant connecting, trusting, feeling. And right now, for the first time since Patricia had known her, Emma was choosing to live. The little girl leaned forward, moving her face closer to Rex's ear. Patricia tensed. Was Emma going to whisper something? Children who'd been through severe trauma often had selective mutism. They'd talk to some people or in some situations, but not others. Emma had been slowly expanding her verbal communication with Sarah and Michael, but she rarely spoke to anyone else. Rex's ears twitched forward, attentive and focused. Emma's lips moved, so close to the dog's ear that no one else could possibly hear what she was saying. It was a secret between a broken child and a dog who somehow understood broken things. Officer Morrison leaned in slightly, trying to hear, but shook his head. The words were too soft, meant only for Rex. Whatever Emma whispered, it took only a few seconds. Then she pulled back, and Patricia watched something extraordinary happen. Rex moved his head just slightly and touched his nose to Emma's palm. It was a gesture of acknowledgement, of acceptance, of promise. Dog to child, survivor to survivor. Emma's face transformed, not into a smile, she wasn't ready for that yet, but something softened in her expression. Some of the ancient fear in her eyes receded just a little. Sarah's hand flew to her mouth. "Oh my God," she breathed. "Did you see that? Did you see her face?" Patricia had seen it, and she knew with the certainty of 19 years of experience that whatever Emma had whispered to that dog, it was significant. It was a breakthrough. It was the beginning of something that would change this child's life. "What did she say?" Sarah asked desperately, looking at Officer Morrison. "Could you hear what she said?" Morrison shook his head, his voice rough with emotion. "No, ma'am, it was too quiet, but—" "But what?" Michael pressed. "But I've worked with Rex for 5 years, and I've never seen him respond to anyone like that. Whatever your daughter said to him, he understood." Emma straightened up, her hand leaving Rex's head. For a moment, Patricia thought the connection would end, that Emma would retreat back into her shell. But the little girl stood there, looking at Rex, and the dog looked back with those patient, knowing brown eyes. And then Emma spoke. Not to the dog this time. To everyone. For 2 minutes and 43 seconds. Patricia Gomez would later check the timestamp on the security footage. Emma Grace stood in front of Rex in complete silence. The hallway existed in a suspended state, as if the entire courthouse had been placed under a spell that no one dared to break. Sarah Daniels had stopped breathing, or at least it felt that way. Her lungs burned as she watched her daughter, this tiny, damaged, precious child who'd lived with them for 18 months without ever truly opening up, stand face to face with a police dog in a moment of connection that defied everything Sarah thought she knew about Emma. "What did she whisper to him?" Sarah asked again, her voice barely audible. "Michael, what did she say?" Michael shook his head, his jaw clenched with emotion. "I don't know, but look at her face. Just look at her." Emma's expression had changed. The blank mask she wore every single day, the protective shield that kept the world at a safe distance, had cracked. Not shattered, not disappeared, but definitely cracked. Her eyes were still locked on Rex, but there was something there now. Something alive, something present. Officer Morrison remained kneeling beside his partner, one hand resting on Rex's back. The German shepherd's tail had slowed but never stopped its gentle wag. Morrison had tears in his eyes now. He'd stopped trying to hide them. In 11 years of police work, in 5 years partnering with Rex, he'd never experienced anything like this. Down the hallway, more people had gathered. A family attorney named Robert Chen, no relation to Judge Margaret Chen, had stopped to watch and now stood frozen, his phone call forgotten. 2 uniformed court officers had appeared from the stairwell and stood at a respectful distance. Even the cleaning staff had paused their work, mops in hand, bearing witness to something they sensed was sacred. Tom Patterson, Judge Chen's bailiff, stood in the doorway of courtroom 6, his hand on the door frame to steady himself. He'd been about to announce that the hearing needed to start, that they were already 7 minutes behind schedule. But the words had died in his throat when he'd seen Emma and Rex. Patricia Gomez had worked with hundreds of traumatized children, but she'd never seen a moment quite like this. She found herself holding her breath along with everyone else, afraid that any sound might break the fragile spell. Emma's hand had fallen back to her side, no longer touching Rex, but she hadn't stepped away. She stood there, 3 feet tall, wearing her pink dress and white tights, staring at a police dog with an intensity that made the air feel electric. And then Sarah saw her daughter's lips move. "Emma," Sarah took a half step forward, instinct overriding caution. "Sweetheart, did you say something?" Emma didn't turn around, didn't acknowledge her mother's voice, but her lips moved again, more deliberately this time. Officer Morrison leaned closer. "She's trying to say something," he whispered. Rex's ears swiveled forward, completely focused on Emma. The little girl took a breath. Sarah could see her small chest rise and fall, and when she exhaled, words came with it. Quiet words. Words so soft that only Morrison and Rex could hear them at first. "What?" Sarah's voice cracked with desperation. "Baby, what did you say?" Emma turned around slowly like someone emerging from a dream. Her dark eyes found her mother's face, and for the first time in 18 months, Sarah saw her daughter's eyes focus with complete clarity. Emma wasn't looking through her. She was looking at her. "I told him," Emma said, her voice still quiet but growing stronger. "I told him thank you." Sarah's knees went weak. Michael caught her elbow, holding her steady. Emma had spoken a complete sentence to them, voluntarily, without prompting. "Thank you for what, sweetheart?" Patricia Gomez asked gently, kneeling down to Emma's level. Emma looked at Patricia, then at Rex, then back at her parents. Something was happening inside her. Sarah could see it. 18 months of walls and defenses were trembling, threatening to collapse. Emma's small body began to shake. "Emma, it's okay," Michael said, moving forward. "You don't have to." But Emma's voice cut through his words, clear and loud enough now for everyone in the hallway to hear. "Thank you for keeping the bad people away now." The hallway erupted in gasps. Sarah's hand flew to her mouth as a sob tore from her throat. Michael's face crumpled, and he pulled Sarah against him as they both began to cry. Patricia felt tears streaming down her own face, her professional composure completely abandoned. Officer Morrison's eyes squeezed shut, and his hand gripped Rex's vest so tightly the fabric bunched beneath his fingers. "Jesus," one of the court officers whispered from down the hall. Robert Chen, the attorney, turned away and walked quickly toward the elevator, his shoulders shaking. The cleaning staff, both women in their 50s who'd worked at the courthouse for decades, stood clutching their mops, tears running openly down their faces. 7 words. Emma had said 7 words that revealed everything about the nightmare she'd survived, and everything about what safety meant to a child who'd never known it. "Thank you for keeping the bad people away now." The now destroyed everyone. The implication of now meant there had been a before. A before when bad people weren't kept away. A before when no one protected her. A before when she'd been hurt and scared and alone. Emma's therapist, Dr. Rivera, had been working for 18 months to help Emma verbalize her trauma. "She needs to name what happened to her," Dr. Rivera had explained. "She needs to be able to say, in her own words, what she experienced. Until she can articulate it, she can't begin to heal from it." But Emma had never been able to find those words. She'd drawn pictures in therapy, dark, disturbing pictures of small figures cowering in corners while large figures loomed over them. She'd acted out scenarios with dolls that made Dr. Rivera's clinical notes read like horror stories, but she'd never spoken about it directly. Until now. Until a police dog had looked at her with eyes that somehow understood, and Emma had felt safe enough to say what she'd never been able to say. Sarah released herself from Michael's embrace and dropped to her knees on the marble floor. "Emma, come here. Please, baby, come here." For a heartbeat, Sarah thought Emma would refuse. But then, slowly, Emma walked toward her mother. Not the mechanical, obligatory walk she usually did. A real walk. A choice. When Emma reached Sarah, she didn't pull away as Sarah wrapped her arms around her. For the first time in 18 months, Emma leaned into the embrace. Her small body pressed against Sarah's, and Sarah felt her daughter's arms, those arms that had hung limply during every previous hug, rise up and wrap around her neck. "You're safe now," Sarah sobbed into Emma's hair. "The bad people are gone forever. Forever, baby, I promise, I promise." Emma's voice, muffled against Sarah's shoulder, came out small but clear. "The dog promised too." Sarah pulled back, holding Emma at arm's length, studying her face. "What?" "The dog promised," Emma repeated, completely serious. I asked him if the bad people were really gone. He promised they were. Officer Morrison made a sound that was half laugh, half sob. She asked Rex if she was safe. Emma nodded, looking at Morrison with those ancient eyes. He said yes. Michael knelt beside his wife and daughter, forming a circle of three. Emma, dogs can't talk, sweetheart. He didn't talk with words, Emma explained with the simple logic of a 3-year-old. He talked with his eyes and his nose. He touched my hand with his nose. That means promise. Patricia pressed her fingers against her eyes, trying to compose herself. In 19 years, she'd never broken down during an adoption proceeding. She was the professional, the steady one, the person who guided families through difficult transitions with calm authority. But watching Emma articulate her trauma and her healing in the same breath, watching this child who'd been nearly destroyed by human cruelty find safety in the promise of a police dog, it was too much. Tom Patterson, still standing in the doorway of courtroom 6, turned and nearly ran back into the courtroom. Judge Margaret Chen was reviewing her notes when her bailiff burst through the door, his face flushed, tears streaming down his cheeks. Tom, she stood up alarmed. What's wrong? What happened? Tom tried to speak but couldn't. He swallowed hard, wiped his eyes, tried again. Judge, you need to hear what just happened in the hallway. Is someone hurt? Do I need to call security? No, it's nothing like that. It's the adoption, the Daniels adoption, the little girl Emma Tom's voice broke. Judge, she spoke, for the first time really spoke, to Officer Morrison's K9 and what she said. What did she say, Tom? Tom looked at his judge. This woman he'd worked with for 12 years, who he'd never seen cry, who he'd watched maintain perfect composure through horrific testimony and heartbreaking verdicts. She thanked the police dog for keeping the bad people away now. Those were her exact words. Thank you for keeping the bad people away now. Judge Margaret Chen's pen slipped from her fingers and clattered onto her desk. Bring them in, she said quietly. And Tom, ask Officer Morrison and that dog to come into my courtroom too. Judge, I don't care about protocol. That child needs to have that dog with her. Make it happen. Tom nodded and left. Judge Chen sat down heavily in her chair, her hands shaking. 23 years on the bench, 10,000 cases. She'd thought she'd heard everything. She'd been wrong. Judge Margaret Chen stared at the closed door of her chambers, her mind reeling from what Tom had just told her. In 23 years on the bench, she'd mastered the art of emotional compartmentalization. She'd learned to hear horrific testimony without flinching, to review disturbing evidence without breaking down, to maintain the dignified composure that justice required. But right now, sitting alone in her chambers with Tom's words echoing in her head, thank you for keeping the bad people away now, she couldn't find that composure anywhere. Margaret's hands trembled as she reached for Emma's file. She'd read it 3 times already, but now she opened it again, forcing herself to review the details she'd tried to keep at professional distance. The police report from the day Emma was found, the hospital records documenting her injuries, the photographs she'd barely been able to look at the first time. This child, this 3-year-old baby, had survived something that would have broken most adults, and she'd just spoken her truth to a police dog in a courthouse hallway, because somehow that German Shepherd had made her feel safe enough to name her trauma. Damn it, Margaret whispered, wiping at her eyes with the back of her hand. She never cried before hearings. Never. But these weren't normal tears. These were the tears of a judge who'd forgotten, somewhere along the way, that every case file represented a real human being with real pain and real hope. Emma Grace wasn't just case 2024 A1847. She was a little girl who'd learned that bad people existed before she'd learned her ABCs. A child who'd had to develop survival instincts before she'd developed the ability to tie her own shoes. And today, that little girl had found her voice. Margaret stood and walked to her window, looking out over downtown Rochester. The autumn trees swayed in the wind, their leaves a brilliant mixture of orange and gold. Somewhere out there, children were playing safely in yards while parents watched. Somewhere out there, families were intact and healthy and normal. But in her courtroom, just beyond that door, sat a family that had been forged through trauma and survival and 18 months of relentless love. The Daniels hadn't given up on Emma when 2 other foster families had. They'd endured the sleepless nights, the violent nightmares, the walls of silence that most people couldn't have tolerated. And now, because of a chance encounter with a police dog, Emma had finally let them in. There was a soft knock on her door. "Come in," Margaret called, straightening her robe and wiping her face one more time. Tom entered, followed by Patricia Gomez, the social worker. Patricia's eyes were red and swollen, her professional demeanor completely absent. "Judge Chen," Patricia said, her voice thick with emotion, "I need to tell you what I just witnessed." Tom told me about what Emma said to the dog. "It was more than that, Judge. It was," Patricia paused, searching for words. "In 19 years of social work, I've never seen a breakthrough like that. Emma has been completely shut down since the day I met her. She's never initiated physical contact. She's never voluntarily expressed emotion. She's been going through the motions of living without actually being present. And now she's different." She hugged her mother, really hugged her. She spoke in complete sentences. She made eye contact. "Judge, that dog did something in 3 minutes that 18 months of therapy couldn't accomplish." Margaret absorbed this information, feeling the weight of it settle in her chest. Where are they now? Still in the hallway, Officer Morrison is with them. Rex, the K9, is sitting beside Emma and Patricia's voice caught. She's petting him, just sitting on the floor in her pink dress petting a police dog, and she looks peaceful. "Judge, I've never seen her look peaceful." Margaret made her decision. "I want them in my courtroom, Officer Morrison and the dog too." "Judge, that's highly irregular. K9 units don't attend adoption proceedings." "I don't care about irregular, Patricia. That child just had the most significant moment of her young life because of that dog. If having Rex present helps Emma feel safe during this hearing, then that dog is going to be in my courtroom. End of discussion." Patricia nodded, a small smile breaking through her tears. "Yes, Judge." "How long do they need? I want to give them time to compose themselves, but I also don't want to delay this any longer than necessary. Emma needs this finalized. She needs to know she's safe, legally and permanently. Give us 10 minutes. Let the Daniels clean up, let Emma have a few more moments with Rex, then we'll be ready." 10 minutes, Margaret agreed. "And Patricia, make sure Officer Morrison understands that I'm requesting his presence as a courtesy to Emma. He's not being ordered. If he's uncomfortable with this, I'll understand." "I'll tell him, but Judge, I don't think you'll have to convince him." When Emma spoke, when she said those words, Officer Morrison looked like someone had hit him in the chest. "I think he needs to be there as much as Emma needs him to be." After Patricia left, Margaret sat back down at her desk. 10 minutes. She had 10 minutes to prepare for what would undoubtedly be the most emotionally charged adoption hearing of her career. She'd presided over complicated adoptions before. She'd handled cases where birth parents contested the proceedings, where children were too old and traumatized to trust anyone, where foster parents had doubts at the last minute. But this was different. This was a case where healing had begun in the most unexpected way, at the most unexpected moment, with the most unexpected catalyst. A police dog named Rex had given a broken little girl the gift of feeling safe enough to speak her truth. Margaret pulled out the adoption decree, the legal document that would make Emma Grace Daniels an official, permanent, irrevocable member of the Daniels family. She'd signed hundreds of these documents over the years. They were standard forms, requiring just her signature and seal to become legally binding. But this one felt different. This one represented more than just legal guardianship. This represented a child choosing to trust again, to hope again, to believe that safety was possible. Her phone buzzed, a text from Tom. "They're ready whenever you are." Officer Morrison agreed to bring Rex into the courtroom. "Fair warning, there's not a dry eye in the hallway. This is going to be emotional." Margaret typed back, "I'm ready. Give me 2 minutes, then bring them in." She stood, adjusted her robe one final time, and looked at herself in the small mirror she kept in her chambers. Her eyes were still slightly red, but her expression was composed, professional, judicial. But inside, Margaret Chen felt something she hadn't felt in years, genuine, overwhelming hope. Hope that this little girl would make it. Hope that the Daniels family would heal together. Hope that sometimes, despite all the darkness and cruelty in the world, love and safety could win. She walked to the courtroom door, took a deep breath and pushed it open. The courtroom was empty except for Tom, who was arranging chairs at the petitioner's table. Sunlight streamed through the tall windows, casting geometric shadows across the wooden pews. Everything looked ordinary, normal, like any other Tuesday morning. But Margaret knew that what was about to happen in this courtroom was anything but ordinary. "Tom," she said quietly, "when they come in, I want Officer Morrison and Rex to stand near the bench, close enough that Emma can see them, but not so close that it disrupts the formality of the proceedings." "Understood, Judge." "And Tom, thank you for noticing what happened in the hallway, for telling me, for recognizing that this moment mattered." Tom's eyes filled again. "Judge, I've worked with you for 12 years. I've seen you handle impossible cases with grace and wisdom, but this one is going to stay with you forever." "I know," Margaret said softly. "I know it will." She walked to the bench and sat down, arranging her notes, placing the adoption decree where she could easily reach it. Her gavel sat in its usual spot, polished and ready. Outside in the hallway she heard footsteps, multiple sets, adult voices murmuring, and then, clear and bright, a child's voice. "Is the nice dog coming too?" Margaret's throat tightened. "Yes, Emma, the nice dog is coming too." The courtroom doors opened, and Margaret Chen, who'd thought she'd seen everything, prepared herself to witness something she'd never forget. The case of Emma Grace Daniels was about to begin. And it would be extraordinary. The doors to courtroom 6 swung open, and Judge Margaret Chen felt her breath catch despite her 23 years of preparation for moments like this. Sarah and Michael Daniels entered first, walking slowly, reverently, like people entering a cathedral. Sarah's eyes were still red and swollen from crying, but she held her head high. Michael's hand was wrapped protectively around his wife's, and both of them kept glancing back at their daughter. Emma Grace came next, walking between Patricia Gomez and Tom Patterson. The little girl wore her pink dress, now slightly wrinkled from sitting on the hallway floor, and her white tights had a small smudge of dirt on one knee. Her stuffed elephant, Mr. Trunk, was tucked under one arm, reclaimed from where she dropped it. But Emma's eyes weren't on her parents or the social worker. They were locked on the figure following behind them. Officer Jake Morrison entered the courtroom in full uniform, his posture military straight, his expression carefully professional. And beside him, moving with perfect discipline and grace, was Rex. The German Shepherd's claws clicked softly on the polished courtroom floor. His vest gleamed under the fluorescent lights, the words K9 Unit clearly visible. Rex's ears were alert, his brown eyes scanning the room with professional assessment, but when his gaze found Emma, his tail began that same slow, gentle wag. Emma's face transformed. Not quite a smile, she wasn't ready for that yet, but something close, something that looked like peace. Margaret watched this entrance with a lump in her throat that she couldn't swallow away. She'd seen countless families enter her courtroom over the years. She'd seen nervous parents, excited children, reluctant teenagers. But she'd never seen anything quite like this. a 3-year-old girl finding courage in the presence of a police dog. "Please be seated," Margaret said, her voice steady despite the emotion churning inside her. "Mr. and Mrs. Daniels, you may sit at the petitioner's table with Emma. Officer Morrison, if you and Rex would stand just here." She gestured to a spot near the bench, close enough that Emma could easily see them. "I would appreciate it." Morrison nodded crisply. "Yes, Your Honor." He led Rex to the designated spot, and the dog immediately sat at attention, his posture perfect, his eyes still tracking Emma. Emma watched Rex settle into position, then looked up at her parents. "The dog is staying?" she asked, her voice small but clear. "Yes, sweetheart," Sarah said, her voice trembling. "Judge Chen asked him to stay, for you." Emma processed this information, her small face serious. Then she looked directly at Judge Chen, making eye contact in a way Patricia had whispered she almost never did, and said, "Thank you." 2 words, simple words, but they nearly undid Margaret completely. "You're very welcome, Emma," Margaret managed, clearing her throat. "Now shall we begin?" The courtroom had filled with a few additional people. A court reporter sat ready at her stenography machine. 2 clerks stood at the back, officially present to file paperwork, but really there because word had spread through the courthouse about what had happened in the hallway. Even the security guard who usually manned the metal detectors downstairs had found a reason to be on the 3rd floor, standing quietly in the doorway. Everyone wanted to witness this. Margaret opened the file before her, though she'd memorized its contents. "We're here today for the final adoption hearing in the matter of Emma Grace, a minor child, and the petition by Sarah Marie Daniels and Michael James Daniels to adopt said child. Ms. Gomez, as the representative from the Department of Child Services, do you have your report?" Patricia stood, her paperwork shaking slightly in her hands. "Yes, Your Honor. I've conducted the required home studies, interviewed the petitioners multiple times, observed Emma in the Daniels home on numerous occasions, and reviewed all therapy reports. It is my professional opinion that this adoption is in Emma's best interest. The Daniels have provided a safe, loving, stable home, and they've demonstrated exceptional commitment to Emma's well-being and recovery." Patricia paused, then added softly, "Your Honor, what I witnessed today in the hallway, Emma's breakthrough, is a direct result of the Daniels' 18 months of patient, unconditional love. They created an environment where Emma could finally feel safe enough to trust. I wholeheartedly recommend this adoption be finalized." Margaret nodded. "Thank you, Ms. Gomez. Mr. and Mrs. Daniels, would you like to say anything before I speak with Emma?" Michael stood, keeping one hand on Emma's shoulder. "Your Honor, 18 months ago, Sarah and I were just a couple who wanted to be parents. We had no idea what we were doing. We'd never dealt with childhood trauma. We didn't understand the first thing about attachment disorders or developmental delays." His voice grew thick with emotion. "But Emma taught us. Every single day she taught us what love really means. Not the easy, romantic kind of love. The hard kind. The kind that shows up at 3 a.m. when she's screaming from nightmares. The kind that tries the same thing 50 times even when it doesn't work. The kind that waits and hopes and believes that healing is possible even when you can't see any evidence of it." Sarah stood beside her husband, tears streaming freely now. "Emma Grace is already our daughter, Your Honor. She has been since the moment she came into our home. But today, we're asking you to make it official. To tell her in words that mean something that she belongs to us forever, that no one can take her away, that she's safe." Margaret felt her own eyes burning. "Thank you, both of you." She turned her attention to the small figure sitting between them. "Emma, can you come up here and talk to me for a moment?" Emma looked uncertainly at her parents. Sarah nodded encouragingly. "It's okay, baby. The judge just wants to ask you some questions." But Emma didn't move toward the bench. Instead, she looked at Rex. The German shepherd's tail wagged once. Emma stood up, walked past the petitioner's table, and stopped directly in front of Rex. Without hesitation, She reached out and placed her hand on his head. The courtroom held its collective breath. "You promise they're safe," Emma whispered to Rex, quiet enough that only Morrison and Judge Chen could hear. "You promise Sarah and Michael are good people." Rex's tail wagged again, stronger this time. Emma nodded, satisfied. Then she turned and walked to Judge Chen's bench, her small face tilted up to look at the woman in the black robe. Margaret leaned forward, bringing herself as close to Emma's level as the elevated bench would allow. "Hello, Emma. I'm Judge Chen. Do you know why you're here today?" "To get adopted," Emma said clearly. "That's right. And do you know what adoption means?" Emma thought about this. "It means they're my forever family. Patricia told me. Forever means they can't change their minds." Margaret's heart clenched. This child understood rejection on a level no 3-year-old should have to understand. "That's exactly right," Margaret said gently. "Forever means forever. No changing minds. No take-backs. Sarah and Michael want to be your parents legally and officially. How do you feel about that?" Emma was quiet for a long moment. Everyone in the courtroom waited, barely breathing. Then Emma said, "Before I thought all grown-ups were bad. Patricia says that's because the bad grown-ups were the only ones I knew, but Sarah and Michael aren't bad, they're good. And the police dog is good. So maybe," she paused, working through thoughts that were too complex for her age, "maybe I can have good grown-ups now." It wasn't really a question, but it also was. Emma was asking permission to trust, permission to hope, permission to believe that safety was real. Margaret felt a tear slide down her cheek, but she didn't wipe it away. "Yes, Emma, you can have good grown-ups now. You deserve good grown-ups. And Sarah and Michael are very, very good grown-ups who love you very much." Emma nodded solemnly. "Okay, then I want them to be my forever parents." The courtroom erupted, not in applause, but in the sound of multiple people trying and failing to stifle their sobs. Margaret reached for the adoption decree with trembling hands. "Then, let's make it official." This was it, the moment that would change everything. Judge Margaret Chen picked up her pen, and Emma Grace smiled, a real, genuine smile, for the very first time since entering the courthouse. Judge Margaret Chen's hand trembled slightly as she held the pen above the adoption decree. In 23 years on the bench, she'd signed thousands of documents, judgments, orders, decrees, but none had ever felt as heavy with meaning as this single piece of paper. She looked down at Emma Grace, who stood before the bench with her hand still resting on Rex's head. The little girl's eyes, those dark, ancient eyes that had seen too much, were fixed on the judge with an intensity that made Margaret's throat tight. "Emma," Margaret said, her voice carrying through the silent courtroom, "before I sign this paper, I want to tell you something very important. Can you listen carefully?" Emma nodded, her small face serious. "You are one of the bravest people I have ever met," Margaret continued, and she meant every word. "What happened to you before, the bad things, the scary things, those weren't your fault. None of it was your fault. Do you understand?" Emma's lower lip trembled. "Patricia says that too, but sometimes I think maybe I was bad and that's why." "No," Margaret's voice was firm but gentle. "You were never bad. You were a baby who deserved to be loved and protected, and the adults who should have done that failed you. But those adults are gone now. And the good adults, Sarah and Michael and Patricia and Dr. Rivera and Officer Morrison, we're all here to make sure you're safe now." A single tear rolled down Emma's cheek. "The dog said that too, when I asked him." Officer Morrison made a sound, half laugh, half sob. Rex's tail wagged steadily, and the dog leaned slightly into Emma's touch. Margaret felt her own tears threatening again. "Rex is a very wise dog. Now, are you ready for me to make Sarah and Michael your forever parents?" "Yes," Emma said, her voice stronger now. "I'm ready." Margaret pressed her pen to the paper and signed her name with deliberate care, Margaret L. Chen. Then she pressed her official seal beside the signature, the metallic clunk echoing through the courtroom. Emma Grace Daniels, Margaret announced, her voice carrying the full weight of judicial authority. By the power vested in me by the state of New York, I hereby grant the petition for adoption. Sarah Marie Daniels and Michael James Daniels are now your legal parents, with all rights and responsibilities that entails. This adoption is final, binding, and irrevocable. She paused, then added with a smile, Emma, you are officially, legally, and forever a Daniels. Congratulations, sweetheart. For a moment, nothing happened. The courtroom existed in perfect stillness, as if the universe itself was holding its breath. Then Emma turned to look at Sarah and Michael. Forever? She asked, her small voice carrying a world of hope and fear. Forever, Sarah sobbed, dropping to her knees with open arms. Forever and always, baby girl. Emma released Rex's head and ran, into her mother's arms. The collision was clumsy and desperate and beautiful. Sarah wrapped Emma in an embrace that looked like she might never let go, and for the first time in 18 months, Emma hugged back with equal ferocity. Michael collapsed beside them, wrapping both his girls in his arms, his shoulders shaking with sobs. The three of them formed a tight circle of family, broken pieces that had found each other and somehow made themselves whole. The courtroom erupted in applause. The clerks clapped through their tears. The security guard whistled. Even the court reporter abandoned her machine to join the standing ovation. Rex stood up and walked to Officer Morrison's side, his tail wagging vigorously now. Morrison's hand rested on his partner's head, and tears streamed openly down the officer's face. Patricia Gomez was crying so hard she could barely stand. In 19 years, through 247 placements, she'd never seen an adoption like this. She'd never seen a child break through trauma so dramatically, so beautifully. Margaret struck her gavel once, a formality but also a declaration. This adoption is finalized, she said, her voice thick with emotion. The Daniels family is officially complete. But she wasn't done yet. Emma, Margaret called out over the applause, would you come back up here for just one more moment? And Officer Morrison, bring Rex too, please. Emma extracted herself from her parents' embrace and walked back to the bench, her new confidence visible in every step. Morrison led Rex forward, and the dog immediately positioned himself beside Emma. Margaret came down from the bench, something she rarely did, and knelt in front of Emma so they were eye to eye. You know what you taught us all today, Emma? Margaret asked softly. Emma shook her head. You taught us that healing doesn't always happen the way we expect. You taught us that sometimes the most broken things can become the most beautiful. And you taught us, Margaret's voice broke, you taught us that trust is the bravest thing a person can do. Emma looked at Rex, then back at Margaret. The dog taught me that. He was scared before too, Officer Morrison told me, but he got brave. Morrison nodded, kneeling beside them. That's right, Emma. Rex came from a bad place just like you did, but we found each other and we helped each other get brave. Like me and Sarah and Michael, Emma said, understanding blooming on her face. Exactly like you and Sarah and Michael, Margaret confirmed. Emma thought about this for a moment, then turned to Rex. She wrapped her small arms around the dog's neck in a hug that Rex accepted with patient grace. Thank you for being brave first, Emma whispered into his fur. It made me brave too. Morrison wiped his eyes roughly. Rex and I are going to visit you sometimes if that's okay with your parents. Would you like that? Emma's face lit up with genuine joy, the first real, uninhibited happiness Margaret had seen from the child. Really? You promise? I promise, Morrison said. Once a month we'll come by and check on you, make sure you're staying brave. Okay, Emma said, then added with 3-year-old seriousness. But I'm going to be brave even when you're not there, because I have forever parents now. Forever parents, the words hung in the air like a benediction. Sarah and Michael approached, and Emma ran back to them, allowing herself to be scooped up into Michael's arms. She rested her head on his shoulder, another first, and Sarah pressed a kiss to her daughter's forehead. "Thank you, Your Honor," Michael said, his voice raw. "Thank you for understanding what she needed today." Margaret smiled through her tears. "Thank you for 18 months of never giving up. Thank you for showing Emma what unconditional love looks like. You saved her life." "No," Sarah said softly, looking down at Emma with wonder. "She saved ours." As the Daniels family prepared to leave the courtroom, now officially, legally, irrevocably a family, Margaret returned to her bench. She watched them walk toward the door, watched Emma wave back at Rex one more time, watched the German shepherd's tail wag in response. Tom approached the bench, his face still wet with tears. "Judge, in 12 years working with you, I've never seen anything like that." "Neither have I, Tom," Margaret admitted. "Neither have I." As the courtroom emptied, Margaret sat alone with the finalized adoption decree. She picked up the document and read her signature again. This was the case she would tell her grandchildren about, the case she would remember on her deathbed, the case that reminded her why she'd become a judge in the first place. Because sometimes, not often but sometimes, the justice system got it right. Sometimes broken children found safe homes. Sometimes patience and love won. Sometimes a police dog could accomplish what 18 months of therapy couldn't. Sometimes healing happened in the most unexpected ways. 3 years later, Officer Jake Morrison stood on the front porch of the Daniels' suburban home, Rex beside him as always. It was their monthly visit, a tradition they'd maintained without fail since that day in the courthouse. The front door burst open, and 6-year-old Emma Grace Daniels came running out, her long dark hair flying behind her, her face split in a huge grin. "Rex," she squealed, throwing her arms around the now-retired police dog. Rex's tail wagged furiously. He was older now, gray around his muzzle, but his eyes still held that patient wisdom. "How's first grade treating you, Emma?" Morrison asked. "It's great, I have friends now, and I'm not scared anymore." "Well," she amended thoughtfully, "sometimes I'm scared, but Mom says that's normal. She says everyone gets scared sometimes." Sarah appeared in the doorway, smiling at Morrison. Come in, come in. Emma made cookies for Rex. She's been talking about your visit all week." As Morrison watched Emma lead Rex into the house, chattering about school and friends, and the book report she was proud of, he marveled at the transformation. This confident, happy, talkative child bore little resemblance to the silent, traumatized toddler he'd met in that courthouse hallway. Judge Margaret Chen had been right. Healing didn't always happen the way people expected. Sometimes it started with 7 words whispered to a police dog. Sometimes those 7 words changed everything. "Thank you for keeping the bad people away now." Now had become forever. And Emma Grace Daniels, once broken, now healing, always brave, was living proof that love, patience, and an unexpected moment of connection could rewrite a child's entire story. The end.